is WIN News.
Tonight, funds to implement the Hazelwood mine fire inquiry's recommendations. The Latrobe Valley throws its support behind the flood-ravaged Hunter. And counting down to the ANZAC centenary. Good evening, I'm Bruce Roberts. Also tonight, the Victorian Ombudsman kicks off a regional tour in Gippsland. $25 million will be spent to implement all 18 recommendations made by the Hazelwood mine fire inquiry. While a date for reopening the inquiry is yet to be confirmed, the terms of reference will be made public by the end of May.
Standing in front of the state's latest mobile air monitoring equipment, the Premier delivered what he said was the most important of the 18 recommendations: rapid air quality monitoring available within hours statewide.
The best of new equipment to make sure that in real time and in the locations where it's necessary, the best air quality monitoring can be done.
Announced today, the state contributed $25.4 million to implement all recommendations set out by the Hazelwood Mine Fire Board of Inquiry in 2014. It covers gaps in mine regulation.
We will end up with better trained regulators that will be able to inspect each of these mines in a way that is far more responsive.
And a 20-year long-term health study
to measure the exact impacts on families, on this community, on their health.
But the community says it can't wait 20 years for answers.
You know, there's still people in the community that actually need that clinical side of it. A long-term health study is great, but can it not run alongside some sort of immediate...
There's no reason why it can't.
That's great for a long-term history. The community needs clinical help now.
A date is yet to be set on the reopening of the inquiry, and it's unknown whether the Honourable Bernard Teague will return as chair. What's certain is the terms of reference will be made public by the end of May. Alexandria Dadzimarkis, WIN News.
The Premier was in Morwell announcing funds to implement all 18 recommendations stemming from the Hazelwood mine fire inquiry.
$25.4 million will be provided to implement each of those important recommendations.
That includes new mobile air monitoring equipment and a long-term health study in the Latrobe Valley. Daniel Andrews told a community meeting immediate health problems in the area would also be addressed.
Some of these are cancers now that kids are being diagnosed with, and there's a 6-month waiting list to get into a paediatrician in Latrobe Valley.
The inquiry will reopen later this year, with new terms of reference expected to be made publicly available by the end of next month. The government says it will be broadened to include risk mitigation strategies at the state's 3 other open-cut coal mines.
Mines are very susceptible not just to fire, but to flood and to land subsidence. And it's critical that we actually have a whole picture of the particular risks.
In the meantime, Hazelwood mine operator GDF Sewers has been sent a bill for $18.4 million to cover the cost of firefighting operations during last year's blaze. Andrew Lund, 9 News.
An inquiry into the Hazelwood mine fire will soon be reopened to investigate whether smoke from last year's blaze contributed to premature deaths in the Latrobe Valley. The investigation fulfills an election promise by the Andrews government, which today announced a $25 million package to implement all of the recommendations from the initial mine fire inquiry.
In the 14 months since the Hazelwood mine fire, the visible signs of the blaze have faded, but the effect on the community endures.
We have to be able to look them in the eye and say we're going to learn from this and we're going to improve for the future.
Next month's budget will include $25 million to implement the 18 recommendations of last year's mine fire inquiry, including a long-term health study for the Latrobe Valley, more resources and powers for Victoria's mining regulator, and sophisticated mobile equipment to monitor air quality. There's also $1.5 million to fulfil an election promise to reopen the mine fire inquiry, which will again be headed by former Supreme Court Justice Bernard Teague.
The terms of reference for the reopened inquiry will be finalised at the end of May. The Premier says it will examine mortality rates in the Latrobe Valley in the weeks and months following the fire.
Did people die? Did people lose their lives as a result of the Hazelwood mine fire? We need to get those answers
The fact that we're now looking at the possible deaths that happened, and there's quite high evidence that they happened, is really important to our community.
The inquiry will also examine risk management and rehabilitation regimes at all 3 open-cut mines in the Latrobe Valley and another in Anglesea.
We hope that this issue is looked at in detail in the second inquiry and that there's a proper review of the rehabilitation bonds for all of the coal mines and other mines in Victoria.
It cost fire authorities $32 million to fight the Hazelwood blaze. The government recently sent an $18 million bill to the mine operator, GDF Suez. Frances Bell, ABC News, Morwell.
A new inquiry will re-examine whether a spike in deaths in the Latrobe Valley was caused by the Hazelwood mine fire. The government will also spend more than $25 million to improve safety at all mines across Victoria.
Kiri-Anne Clissold is convinced her partner Craig McCormack suffered an aneurysm as a direct result of last year's Hazelwood coal mine fire and hopes a new inquiry can prove it.
I know it in my heart, I know it in my soul, I know that's what killed him.
The blaze burned for 45 days and blanketed the Latrobe Valley with toxic smoke and ash that residents say caused serious illness and 11 deaths. Calls to investigate the link were rejected by the state coroner last November, but today the Premier told residents the deaths deserved to be re-examined.
I think those families and this entire community have a right to know what were the exact health impacts.
Daniel Andrews also announced $25.4 million to implement the final recommendations from the first inquiry, including a new mobile unit to test air quality in the event of another disaster. Among the new measures is a long-term health study over 20 years. But what locals say is needed now is more medical resources in the Latrobe Valley to provide treatment.
Some of these are cancers now that kids are being diagnosed with, and there's a 6-month waiting list to get into a paediatrician in Latrobe Valley.
The commitment has given Craig GITTOS, who has 3 sick children, hope.
Just a big sigh of relief. It is. It's just going to help.
But it's too late for Kiri-Anne. She's moving from Morwell, leaving painful memories behind.
They've taken enough from my family and me. We're out, and we won't be coming back.
Tracy Macbeth, 7 News.
The Hazelwood mine fire inquiry will be reopened to examine whether smoke from last year's blaze caused premature deaths. The government will also implement all 18 recommendations from the original inquiry. Leah Craven with more.
The memories of the mine fire that blanketed the town of Morwell in thick acrid smoke for 45 days last February are still fresh for locals.
It was quite scary.
I'm having difficulty breathing.
Today, the Premier announced more than $25 million in funding to implement the recommendations from an inquiry into the devastating Hazelwood fire. There'll be tough new regulations for coal mine operators, while state-of-the-art air quality monitoring equipment can now be transported to fire-affected areas within 24 hours.
So that in the event that we're ever confronted by something even remotely like the Hazelwood mine fire, we'll be able to make sure communities know what's going on.
The government will also reopen the inquiry to examine whether the pungent smoke caused premature deaths in the area, as well as a 20-year study into the health impacts of the air pollution.
We have to be able to look them in the eye and say we're going to learn from this and we're going to improve for the future.
While residents welcomed the long-term health study, today they took the opportunity to urge the Premier to give them what they really want: more medical resources sent to the region as a matter of urgency.
All 3 asthmatic kids, myself asthmatic, we were treated like dirt.
Some of these are cancers now that kids are being diagnosed with, and there's a 6-month waiting list to get into a paediatrician in Latrobe Valley.
Leah Craven, 10 Eyewitness News.